Well, hi, guys.
Hey, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
Great to see you again.
Nice to be here.
Great to be talking through the history of your history, the history of the company. Last session, we ended up in the early 80s. We talked about when you bought out your partner, Steve.
That was the beginning of 83.
Beginning of 83, so early 80s. And that was a tough time. That was an internal struggle that you had to get through.
Mm-hmm.
And you did. But the early 80s, as I recall, there were some external struggles. The music scene was not very helpful for acoustic guitars. You had disco was still a thing. You had electric-driven rock. That was
sort of a glam rock thing starting. So we were what we made was pretty granola-like.
Wasn't 82 the low point for the guitar market?
Could have been. And remember, that's when we did the work with that governmental organization in Mexico called Fidepal.
Maybe in 80 or something like that.
It was 80, 81, because I have that in my mind. We went in June.
Steve was still with the company then?
Yeah, it was 81 that we went. I had to come back for my daughter to be born in August.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, so we did, we were stumbled upon, and we did some consulting for their guitar industry in Paracho. They wanted to try and industrialize it a little bit, and we were sort of the right size. We knew how to hand make a guitar, and we knew how to machine make a guitar. And they paid us money. We had some income. It's like we had a night job to support our day job.
What was his name?
Francisco Andrade.
It was Fidepal. It was a government agency that wanted to improve standards of living of guitar makers. It was a project that had been funded down in Paracho. So we taught him how to make a guitar. How much did they pay us? Do you remember? But it was significant for our teeny little company that was doing $100,000 a year.
I think we ended up bringing in about $15,000 for the consulting, something like that.
Okay.
Could have even been up to 20, but it was enough money. We worked pretty hard on it. I worked a lot on it, designing the workbenches, that kind of thing. Anyway, it was income. Just live the fight another day.
And then we had a trip down to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
It took us down there, took us down to Paracho, and I think they took us to Uruapan and the capital. We saw Ballet Folklorico.
Mm-hmm.
We were gone, maybe a week?
We were gone a week. It was great. We had great food. Well, It was kind of the farthest flung I'd ever gone in my life as far as world travel.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun. And your friend from high school, Tawny Gant, came and translated for us, which was really fun. And we met people that were guitar makers in the little town of Paracho. And I was just in Paracho a couple of years ago. I went down for their feria, which is their big 1 week long, 2 week long guitar building bash. And we went down to sort of help them with some ebony, but it was fun. We stayed in Uruapan and went back and forth to the feria in Paracho every day.
And when we went down, they took us, I remember one of the last nights, they took us to Cuernavaca, about an hour's drive out of Mexico City. We ate at a really nice place called Las Mañanitas. Had gardens and peacocks walking around and stuff, kind of a very high-end restaurant.
I've been to Cuernavaca.
Have you?
Oddly enough.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
The land of eternal spring, they call it.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, that was 81.
81, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I think all of us can admit that the guitar has taken us all over the world. And that was your first foray into the world, so to speak.
Yeah, we'd been to NAMM shows before, but never really out of the country to do anything guitar-wise.
Yeah.
And then this thing just happened. Just someone walked in our door one day, and all of a sudden we were engaged in a project, and we got to do a little travel, and we made a little income.
Noble Field,
he lived in
that was his
Playa,
contact.
Tijuana, and he was a furniture buyer for Montgomery Ward's in Texas.
An American, retired.
And he had a dream to have his own furniture factory and his wife in Mexico. And his wife said, well, get off your chair and do it. So they moved down there to Mexico City, and he opened up a factory making Noble Field furniture. And they hired him as a consultant too. He was much older than us. He was the age that we are now, or Maybe he was even 70.
Yeah.
But he was great. We met people. It was fun.
That's how Francisco found us, right through Noble Field. That was his contact. Yeah.
Anyways, that little moment, that 1 year was sort of a survival year for us because selling guitars was hard. Making guitars was hard. And we had enough income to pay the rent and sort of keep going.
Yeah, and have some fun experiences.
It's kind of funny. You see these, you read stories of big corporations and you find out that, they started doing something and then it got bad. So they opened up a sandwich shop and sold sandwiches for 9 months. And then they, got back into kind of what they were doing, modified a little bit. The things that businesses do to survive isn't a whole lot different than the things that a person does to survive. Hey, I took a night job so I could pay for that baby that was coming. And then my wife, started working and then she stopped working. And then I took 2 jobs, and you do all these things. And years later, you see them, they're an established family and they're moved, they got it all worked out. And that's how business is.
Yeah.
You got to care for it in the same way. Do what you need to do. Like we talked on a previous episode about me making necks for musicians' supply at the time, right?
That's right.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, and we used to say, it seemed like at the time, and I think we used to say it, that we could have just dried up and blown away at any time.
No one would have even known it.
We weren't established at all. It was still trying to get off the ground. We could have just disappeared pretty easily.
Well, that's
there was no momentum.
I don't even think the UPS man would have noticed we were gone.
when the market really bottomed out, when things were tough in the early 80s, the established guitar brands were impacted differently than you guys were, weren't they?
Oh, they were very small too. During 82, everything that converged, Saturday Night Fever, disco music, no live music in clubs during that period, the synthesizers, all those things really hit the guitar market bad. Plus acoustic guitar was coming out of the kind of folky thing, and it was more of a techno period. Right, so acoustic guitars are unpopular.
It was, I attribute that bad market as quite a factor in our success. Why? Because we didn't know the difference really between not selling guitars because the market was bad or not selling guitars because we had no idea what we're doing. Okay, it was a struggle. We were used to struggle. You start out poor, you stay poor. The world has a crisis, and you're like, it doesn't seem like a crisis to me. I'm just as poor as I was when there wasn't a crisis, right? So in a way, our business was like that. And yet a company like Martin had reached their pinnacle of production in their entire history. They were making 80 guitars a day, 20,000 guitars a year. And Martin shrunk all the way down to, I believe it was 9 guitars a day, 4 days a week. So Taylor was making 5 or 6 guitars a week when Martin was making 400 guitars a week. And then Taylor was making 6 or 7 guitars a week when Martin was making 36 guitars a week. So all of a sudden we went from, 1% of their size to 30% of, 25% of their size. And as it started coming back on, we'd had some years behind us. Guild disappeared during that time. Gibson disappeared during that time. And so it was kind of our opportunity to get out on the dance floor when it came back. Something we had no control over.
Yeah.
It just happened.
Right.
During those early years, dealers on the West Coast would buy their Martins from Coast Wholesale Music. They weren't selling direct everywhere.
Now, Kurt, as I recall, the early 80s, speaking of disappearing, you disappeared on the road for a couple years practically. And the agreement between you was don't come back unless you get more dealers to buy
I had
guitars.
started going out for a couple of weeks at a time. I think it was over spring break. I would go out, and I'd go out through that loop across Arizona, New Mexico to Texas, up to Oklahoma and back, because we started selling a lot of guitars in Texas. So it was a good reason to go out and cultivate more dealer relationships.
Mm-hmm. But, you think that was the mid-'80s?
I started 1980-ish.
Oh, really?
I started pretty early. Yeah. And then when we bought Steve out in early '83, we'd never done more than about $125,000 worth of business in a year because it was so hard. Everything was always so hard. So then, in the end of '82, I went out and I was like, that's when we sold the guitars to Arnold Morgan, and I had to get out and hit the road and not come back. And Steve was still a partner. That's when, I think I talked about this last time, things got a lot easier. It's like, well, you make a guitar, you go out and find someone to buy it, and you sell it and you collect the money. I mean, instead of like insurmountable problems all the time, you know. So, and it was that period when I was out selling guitars, and Bob was in the shop with Don Miller, you know, making guitar bodies.
Kurt used to make guitar bodies. People don't know this. He made guitar bodies. He learned how to do it. He did it, and he enjoyed it. But it wasn't. Sometimes I could say he was doing it, but not digging it. What he wanted to do was build a business. And so it was a little bit hard to lose one of your shop workers when he went out. But then it just got to the point, it was like, we're not going to have anything unless you go out and sell those guitars. Yeah. I'll figure out how to get them made. Believe me, we'll get them made.
Yeah.
So he did.
And you brought in Don W. Miller Jr. Yeah. Which is a whole different story.
Yeah.
But anyway, but then, so it was clear to us we needed to buy Steve out because we just saw things differently. When we bought Steve out, he was the finisher. He did all the finish work on our guitars. So we had to replace him. We had to find someone we could hire to do the finish work. You want to take it from there?
Well, I was pretty aggressive in my productivity. I worked. I get up and I work, and I get it done. And in those days, I say I learned how to put in a 6 or 8 hour day on Christmas morning before my family woke up, you know, because work had to get done. And I never really robbed that time from people who need it, but there was other hours in the day where I could do it. And so I would work. And Steve, our partner, was sidetracked all the time, and his job was to get guitars finished. And this was kind of our gripe. There were other things he wanted to do. And so I had learned from Agostino Laprinzi, we call him Augie, to make a guitar every day. But what would happen is they would get to finish and they would stack up to a pile of guitars at the end of the week. So on Thursday afternoon, he would be buffing guitars. Here comes 10 guitars to me, and I'd missed my opportunity on Monday to do 2, and on Tuesday to do 2, as far as gluing the bridge, the necks on, fretting them, getting them strung, putting them in a box. It was a lot of work. And I would get all those guitars on Thursday, starting early in the afternoon, and I would stay until all the necks were set and glued up. I would come in. There's 10 of them, and I'd come up way before, as soon as the glue was dry enough, start fretting them, stringing them up, boxing them, filling out labels, and getting everyone that we had an order for shipped out on Friday. And all that work would stack up at the end. And I just realized that we're not going to succeed if we can't get our work under control. And so I started talking to Kurt. A business divorce is kind of as bad as a regular divorce, I'm sure, you know, but we had to go through the pain of that. But, you know, I'd call him and I go, "It's time, Kurt." Kind of reminds me of when I called from the show. I'd gone up early to the NAMM show, and the Rothschild, you could tell it was dying. And I called back down. It's like, "You guys need to, I don't know if you're coming up, but it's time. Yep. We can't continue with this." And I said that with Kurt. He agreed. I said, "I think you need to come home. We need to handle this. We need to wrap up our partnership, invoke our conditions for buying each other out."
So then we did, but then you had to replace Steve.
Had to replace
get someone who could do the finish work.
Yeah, how did you solve that?
Well, I brought in Tim Larank, who was the guy from the American Dream, who was off surfing in Bogota and buying emeralds for cheap and coming home and selling them. And I took his bench on my day of when I got my job. But remember, we talked about Moneybags Jeff Stelling, who had started his company with Greg Daring after Daring worked for us for a little while. And he hired Tim Larank, finishing banjos, and he hired this Kim Breedlove, who was a great builder, and then Larry after that. Maybe it was the other way around. Maybe he hired Larry and then Kim. And Kim and Larry and Tim LaRank all grew up on the top of this hill, residential hill. And James Goodall's mom taught the art classes in their school, and he lived down the hill from them. So these names that you know in the music industry. So we hired Tim because Jeff his business was, he was moving it to Virginia. The employees were actually Greg and Janet Darings. And they had this complicated sort of relationship with Jeff where it was Jeff's building and they weren't partners. Greg and Janet were subcontractors for Jeff. They hired the people, they trained the people, they built the shop. Jeff did final assembly to the banjos and he bought those parts from Greg and Janet, and that was their income. And then he said, I'm moving, not taking any of you with me. And Greg and Janet moved across the street into a garage and started making dulcimers, and they lost the ability to keep Larry and Kim and John Gerlach and Tim. Greg trained those guys, and I hired them.
And so the first one was Tim, and we approached Tim, and we paid Tim more than we had made before in a year as a partner at the business.
And he came in and he finished guitars. A lot of the industry knows Tim LaRank, and he's done the last couple of years that he worked for us before he retired. He was sort of becoming a bit of a historian for us, and he'd put together a bunch of really great slideshows from his perspective of what Taylor was like, and he was doing them at guitar maker symposiums. And I sat through one once, and I'm like, man, that's really good, Tim. And he sort of became the answer man because he worked in repairs for the last 10 or 15 years of his life, and he remembered how American Dream guitars were made, and which meant that he was able to do repair work to those that our newer guys wouldn't know how to do. And he trained the people we have there now how to get guitars apart, put them back together, because our guitars were made so many different ways throughout the years.
Over the years, yeah. How was Tim able to balance his surfing and guitar work? Was that
coming to work became a priority for him? He'd grown up some, just like us.
Yeah. And we had our expectations. And that was a period where, Bob was looking for help, talking with people, trying to figure things out, trying to get, have people help him design things and get work done. He and Greg would, come in at night and work on things together. And I remember he'd be like, oh man, that Larry Breedlove, I wouldn't want to hire that guy and have him working for me. He'd be like that. He'd have people in mind that he knew could help him, that, if he could work with them or hire him or whatever. You were on a quest for a lot of years.
Yeah. This sounds really cruel, but I fired a guy to hire Larry because I couldn't afford an extra employee. Mm-hmm. Now, the guy that I let go was a pretty good guy, but he could tell and I could tell that this wasn't going to be a long-term relationship. So I just said, I need to hire someone. I only have so much budget. You're sitting in his chair. It's time for you to go back to construction. Let's start tomorrow. And I've usually been pretty good over my life of taking a breath and saying the words that need to be said. And I did it that day, and Larry came in and started working. And it was really good for us because Larry and I became very good guitar design partners. He could work on something and I could work on something, and we never got our feathers ruffled. To be able to design something with somebody is not easy because you pour your souls. I've spent a lot of time with Andy over the last 10, 11 years. We go into product development. He brings something in, and then people comment, you bring your new thing in, and they pick it up wrong, they play it wrong, they look at it, they turn it, are they all going to have this? And they're like, maybe a chef feels that way when someone pours ketchup on what he brings out and just starts taking big bites and it's talking all the way through it. And the chef's like, I just made one of the most amazing things that I thought was good. Right. And you guys are like giving your leftover meat to your dog. He's like, did you even taste that prime rib? But with Larry and I, we could talk about a curve without upsetting each other. Yeah, maybe I like it, Larry. Maybe it could go a little bit more like this. Larry, what do you think about that? Pretty good. What if you pulled it out to here? Oh, that looks good. That right there, that relationship that was just pure natural chemistry, as opposed to bad chemistry that you might have with somebody, and you can't get past that bad chemistry. It just never goes right. You can't be professional enough for it to go right. I was blessed.
Larry was Mr. Easygoing.
And I knew how to be easygoing with him, you know, and so it was good. And he drew nice curves, and we had. That's good so curves. Important.
Yeah,
because the guitars, there's no square corners on a guitar, you know. So him and I became sort of guitar making partners. And as a matter of fact, the day I sat down with Andy, jumping way ahead, the first time I took Andy to lunch to present the idea of him coming to work for us, I said, Andy, can you name the guitar maker at these places? And he's like, nope. Can you name the guitar maker at Taylor? You and Larry. Can you name the guitar maker at Collings? Bill Collings, right? Okay, so we just named some major guitar companies, and you can't name the guitar maker. That just seems odd. I don't want you to never not be able to name the guitar maker at Taylor. You could name the guitar maker at Taylor. You could name them. But the cool thing is Andy said, you and Larry. I mean, he knew it was me and Larry together. I've always had help making guitars. I never did it all by myself.
So we did that in early 83, and then things got a lot easier. I was out a lot that year selling guitars, and we doubled. The first year without Steve, we doubled. And we'd never been able to get up above this certain level before we bought him out, and then we doubled. And then
we doubled again.
And then we kept doubling. At the end of that first year, 83, in November, we incorporated. We'd been a general partnership up to that time.
Yeah.
So, and the market hadn't gotten better. It was still a horrible guitar market, but we saw what we could do to actually change our fortunes in a lousy market.
We made guitars that people liked, and you went out and sold them. You introduced people to our guitars. Didn't have to be a hard sell, but I will say the early adopters had to have some entrepreneurial bravery, courage to take on this guitar. But by then they'd heard of us because we'd already gone through the Rothschild years. And so there had been some advertising, and they exposed us to some dealers. But Kurt would drive into town and open up the Yellow Pages, find the music stores, and go visit them.
Yeah, and our guitars sold. So if they sell, they'll reorder them. I mean, if they bought them from me and they didn't sell, that would have been the end of it. But people liked them and they sold them.
Kurt, what was it like? You're a young guy. You're hitting the road solo, traveling the country. Was that an adventure for you? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was a fun adventure because I got to get out, see other parts of the country, meet people, see a lot of different stores, and hear, firsthand their objections, and what they were looking for. And, it was fairly easy. I mean, you couldn't open someone up as a dealer every time you cold called on somebody. But normally I'd go into a new town and I'd find someone to buy guitars from me. And so then I'd just keep going, I'd collect checks, or, you would ship the guitar COD.
Box up a guitar, put the COD tag on it. UPS collected money back then.
Right.
Wow, it's amazing. They would collect money for you. They'd get money and then remit it to you. I hadn't even thought about that for the longest time.
Well, we've been struggling so long, to go out and find people that wanted to buy our guitars from us. It felt wonderful.
Were there some lessons that you learned on the road, just how the world works, that you didn't learn in college?
Oh, I didn't learn anything in college, that I could actually use in business. I don't know. It was just fun. I'd stay at Ramada Inns, and that was actually kind of a splurge to spend $30 a night, in a Ramada Inn. That's what they cost then. And, I'd have a company credit card. Periodically, Bob would have to send me some money.
But I think that, what I learned vicariously by Kurt talking to me was, dealers are in business and they want something that sells. At the same time, they love guitars and they might buy a guitar just because they are thrilled about a guitar. And maybe it works out for them business-wise or maybe not. We found dealers that could plan their future. They were strategic about what they did. They would buy something that they loved. They would present it, tell the story, and sell it and reorder. And then we found other dealers who would buy a guitar because they loved it. And then when they sold it, they were like, oh, I'm glad that's over. Mm-hmm. And you would have to start all over with them to get them to sell another one. You've sold guitars for a long time. You probably know that's still true now. Oh, yeah. It's like if you buy another one, you can sell another one. Yeah, but, oh man, I finally got rid of that one. And so we learned all that. I learned that. So then I started learning, I got to make this guitar to where it doesn't draw bad attention. Mm-hmm. And I learned where people look when they hold the guitar. Like, for example, it's been a long time since I've been teaching people in the factory, but I'd say when you hold a guitar, you see the waist and you see down in the sound hole. You see the kerfing at the waist on the back. That needs to be clean because that's where someone looks. And they look up here and they see the nut. So let's talk about the places where people always look and make sure that those places are always perfect, because the last thing you want to do is interrupt somebody's enjoyment when they're thinking about buying a guitar by them looking down and seeing buffing compound. And then the next thing you know, they're looking at the guitar instead of playing the guitar. Mm-hmm. And I learned all that stuff from feedback from Kurt. It was really interesting. He'd tell me how they were. It's like, okay, I'm going to do something about that. Mm-hmm.
A lot of times dealers would put me up for the night. I was young, didn't have much money. And that was a kind of usual thing for people to do.
Any dealer relationships that were really forged during those early years that did business for a long time?
Well, some of these people a lot of people we're still friends with. A lot of people still sell our guitars. In fact, I know one of the things we're going to talk about today are the Artist Series guitars. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about that. That's another idea that came to us from McCabe's Guitar Shop. Yeah. I mentioned them before, how they would suggest different things customers were looking for, and we would then, try them. I want to say something else I've been thinking about since the last time we sat down, and that is that people know us as a modern acoustic guitar, easy to play, cutaway electric guitar. We didn't set out to be that. We just wanted to make guitars. Now, Bob wanted to make a guitar that was easy to play, and he and Larry Breedlove, that we'll talk about in a little bit, worked on the styling a little bit of the guitar. Mm-hmm. But we didn't set out to be a cutaway acoustic electric guitar. That was just in response to what dealers suggested us their companies were looking for. Mm-hmm. We could have gone in a really different direction. I'm just saying that wasn't our purpose to make that guitar, but it was market opportunities that we seized, then we became known as that.
It's true. And I don't know if it was Frets magazine, and I think Frets sort of morphed into acoustic guitar. I'm not sure. But Frets magazine, I believe it was that magazine that did an article about us. And this was in the Barkus Berry pickup days with Bartolini preamps. And the beginning of the article, this is close to a quote, but it's Taylor Guitars, a reluctant supplier to the acoustic guitar industry, has, and they went on. And I'm like, well, yeah. So that even the magazines knew that nobody really wanted to put pickups in their guitars, but we did, even though we were reluctant.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So some people may think that, Taylor is this or Taylor is that. Or, if someone is very traditional and doesn't like what we do, and I don't like Taylor because this and that, they're modern acoustic electric guitars. Well, really, we went in that direction to be able to sell guitars. That wasn't our calling, so to speak.
Well, yeah. Electric guitars were big, I suppose, and you came up with ideas to appeal to electric guitar players. So we got to appeal to somebody.
Exactly. And that happened just because our guitars were always easy to play. Yeah. Sam's were, Bob's were in particular. A lot of electric guitar players would come when it was still the American dream and have their guitars worked on, because there was very little crossover at that point between acoustic and electric guitars, because electric guitars couldn't play the acoustics that were being made.
And then there's the aesthetic part as well, where you stained maple and you had guitars that were more blingy or more more appealing for stage use, I guess. Is that?
Yeah, we were trying to, break out of the acoustic guitar funk coming out of the 70s. And that came from McCabe's Guitar Shop. They suggested, why don't you just try something different, do whatever you want to do, and surprise us. Remember that?
Yeah, they were having an anniversary of their own. And they said, we want to buy a guitar. We don't care what it costs, and we don't care what it is. We just want you to make something special. Like, just go kind of nuts and do something different. We want this guitar to celebrate our anniversary. And that was a lot of confidence that they bestowed on us.
That can end a couple of ways, right?
Yeah. And so Larry Breedlove and I started talking, and Larry was a good artist, and he had been doing this type of artwork on gessoed paper, where he used this kind of plastic that was stickum. It was called frisket, and you put it down, and then with a razor blade, you could cut out what you wanted to reveal, and then you could paint in there. And he had this idea for putting that down and making these flames and staining. So he would take a guitar top and gesso it. Gesso is a base for a canvas that people use to paint on. He'd wipe gesso over it, and it would still leave the guitar spruce, but it was whiter spruce, like it had white makeup on it. Mm-hmm. And then he put it around the sound hole, and he'd slowly cut these flames. It was all Larry who did that. And then he would stain. Then he'd pull the frisket off and do another layer until pretty soon there were these intertwined flames, and where a red would cross a yellow, the intersection would be the color that the red and the yellow would make, right? And we made that guitar. I believe we stained it blue.
Blue Dreadnought.
Blue Dreadnought.
And the peghead had, we were envious of Takamine, how they'd spell out the name so you could easily see it, on TV. So we put on Taylor in white letraset.
Running
along
Taylor,
running
kind of slanted caps, and blue stained maple with these beautiful flames on there. And that's when Larry designed the bridge you see on our guitars now. We called that the Artist Series bridge on the first time we did it. We sent that guitar out, and they loved it. Mm-hmm. They thought it was cool. You know why? Because it was cool. That's why they thought it was cool, because it actually was cool. It wasn't, if you're going to do something different, it better be good. And this one seemed natural.
Yeah, I wonder where that guitar is today, and if the person who owns it realizes that it was the first one.
Amazing.
Made that way. I mean, that's some cool history to it.
Yeah, and we made more of them. We
showed them at the NAMM show then.
And then Jeff Cook from the group Alabama bought one. He wanted it in green, and they held it on the cover of their Christmas album, which is a good Christmas album, by the way. Go out and buy the Alabama Christmas album. It's good.
Yeah, did we show them one we'd done, or pictures of them or something? Remember they came to San Diego, and we picked them up at Sports Arena. We went and had Mexican food with them.
Yeah, with Dan and Betsy.
That's right.
That's right. And Dan sort of introduced us to Jeff.
That's right.
Jeff really dug that.
Yeah.
Was there a purple guitar that maybe inspired him at that time, or is that?
I'll tell you the story of that. I'd gotten a call from Glenn Wetterland, who was working at Newt Coupe Music in Minneapolis, and they took care of all of Prince's gear. And I think this was 85, either 84 or 85. And he said, Prince is looking for a 12-string. He hasn't found anything he loves yet. I was thinking maybe you guys could make something unique. And I told him about the Artist Series. And he said, well, the thing is, we'd be making it on spec. And it couldn't say Taylor on it, because he doesn't want any manufacturer names on anything, because it's an implied endorsement. So Bob and Larry, I guess, made the guitar a jumbo 12-string, and it was purple. And then we shipped it off.
Beautiful flames on it, too.
Yeah, cool guitar. And Glenn took it and put it in the green room for Prince when he was going to do a concert. He came in, saw it, opened up the case, loved it, and bought it. And
then he played, they made a video, Raspberry Beret, and Wendy played it on that video.
On Live Aid or something.
On Live Aid, yeah.
We're like, whoa.
Then we ended up making him a Paisley guitar later.
That was cool. I never saw that used live, but that was a cool guitar.
And eventually he was producing the Bangles, and he either gave it or loaned it to Susanna Hoffs.
Oh, really? Wow.
I remember she played that for some time.
Yeah, another one-off guitar that'd be cool to have today.
Yeah.
Nobody else was doing this with acoustic guitars, were they, at this time?
Not that I know
traditional. Yeah.
You know, and we were, the Paisley guitar was sort of a different thing, you know. I mean, it was a guitar black. Maybe it was a black guitar, and it had white and black Paisley on the top. It was real pretty. We hired someone to do the Paisley. I don't remember who, but we hired somebody to do the Paisley between coats of finish.
And it was just on the top, right?
It was just on the top. But
maybe a black back and sides.
Yeah, pretty sure. In fact, I'm positive. It was a grand concert with a cutaway. But the Artist Series guitar was all stained, so you saw the wood through everything, even the flames. It would have been so much easier to just spray solid colors on them. But we had to cut the frisket out and score. You had to score the spruce so that the stain would run to that score line and stop and not jump that bridge and bleed over to the other side. It was hard work. We painstakingly did that. But the guitars were cool, but they were still acoustic. They still... They didn't seem out of place. It was just a new modern thing to do. And, well, you know, it helped get the guitar in a photo. And some people were starting to, I don't think MTV Unplugged had quite started yet, but it was sort of a precursor for that. And people were like, you know, these guitars play cool, and everything else in our band now is painted. We're not... You know, the days of alembic guitars with wild wood and that kind of stuff, you know, featuring the wood wasn't popular then. Yeah. It just really wasn't. And so there's precious few of them made. I don't think there was more than a couple hundred that we made, but I think they had a big impact.
Yeah, if that many. We got on the cover of some, might have been Guitar Player Buyer's Guide for the holidays.
Right. I do remember that.
Yeah.
I have to think take the McCabe's guitar, for example. When you're commissioned to build a guitar like that the team at the shop really rallies around that. And when it's done, I mean, you guys remember it vividly to this day, that the whole team must have rallied around it. And it's like, yeah, look at what we did. And that had to be a shot in the arm for the shop.
Yeah, I mean, we're only a dozen people total at that time. And everyone loved it. And then when we got feedback, because what would you think you would normally do if someone like McCabe's asked for that? Well, you'd put pearl on four sides of it, and you'd design a new vine for the fingerboard, and you know, you'd make a very traditional guitar. Maybe it would be more heavily inlaid, or you'd go get a more rare piece of wood. And we just went the other way because of the times that we were in, right?
It was the 80s.
It was the 80s. Mm-hmm. We gave it a mullet. Kurt had a pretty good mullet for years. I've always been jealous of Kurt's hair.
In the 90s, yeah.
When I first met Kurt, he had hair down to his, waist in the back.
So can we jump back to 84?
Yep.
That was the Olympics were in LA that year, weren't they? If I'm not mistaken.
Could be.
You guys are you're still growing. You made, according to my records, you had 12 employees and made between 500 and 550 guitars that year. So you're 10 years in. You're growing the business. You hired your first clinician. Talk to me about Harvey and Chris. And was that the precursor to what we know as the road show?
That happened from doing NAMM shows and no one able to hear the guitars, and then getting out and traveling around. That year we bought Steve out 83. I was gone a lot that year on the road. And I'd gone to one dealer in DeKalb, Illinois called Axe in Hand. Larry
Hendrickson.
And he had a lot of collectible guitars. He built a big collection. And when I went there, this young guy named Harvey Reed was there playing. It was really an incredible fingerstyle player. And I was blown away by how good he was. And then we got the idea of, for the upcoming NAMM show in January 84, got the idea to have Harvey there on a stool with a guitar with a pickup in it, a little amp, so that he could play and people could actually hear something. Because it would always be that people would, I wish I could hear in here. They'd pick up a guitar like that. So that was the first time. That was January 84 that Harvey came out. We had our little 10 by 10 booth. And that was the year we met James Burton. Because Harvey was playing and James came by with Dan and Betsy. And listened to Harvey play. And we struck up that relationship with James Burton then, which was a fun thing. Because all the people he's played with, over the years.
We heard great stories from him.
Yeah.
When he played with Ricky Nelson and when he played with Elvis.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, hello. And his Paisley Telly.
Yeah.
And his chicken pickin' that he invented. And it was really interesting to know another artist like that who might not be, he's not a household name to just people who listen to music, but he's a household name to people who play music.
Yeah,
right?
big influencer in the guitar world. And we went to Vegas once to hear him play with Jerry Lee Lewis, I think, and also up in the Valley. Maybe, I think it was both of us, could have been just me. I remember afterwards going out and some diner or something and talking with Ronnie Tutt, who's since passed away, who'd played drums with Elvis and was playing with Jerry Lee at the time.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to meet people along the way.
So that was Harvey in 84.
He could play too.
Yeah, he's a great player. Then in 84, I think I was contacted by Chris Proctor. I don't think I met him anywhere, but he was another fingerstyle player, Salt Lake City, tall guy, big hands. Now Harvey needed a guitar with a wider neck. So did Chris. And Chris approached us with the idea of a more balanced sounding guitar, a smaller guitar. And I think I'd heard from McCabe's also about it. So that's when we developed the Grand Concert guitar.
And they were both national fingerstyle champions.
Yeah, at Winfield.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. That's pedigree.
And so he asked about the wider neck, the smaller guitar. He was 100% into using pickups at the time. And that's part of when he continued to add vitamins to this idea that was growing in us that people are starting to amplify guitars and you don't need a big guitar to play for a big audience anymore because you're relying on sound systems to do it. And that started a slow little sort of migration and adaptation to smaller guitars. And he loved that balanced sound. He played really slinky strings. He played really precise with his long fingers and not really loud. And he was particular about the Grand Concert. We made the first one for him, didn't we?
Yeah. And he pitched me on the idea too, because he would travel and give like house concerts and little shows that he'd set up with dealers to put together like performance/workshop for people to come in and learn about playing. And
wasn't he playing the college circuit too and had some expenses covered?
It was, I don't remember that part, but it was an idea he was already paying for the travel. If we wanted to use him to do Taylor workshops, we could pay him to do that as well. It'd help cover his expenses. It would help the dealer. We would learn how to figure out how to market it to bring customers into the store. So we'd expose more people to him, to Taylor guitars, and to the store. And that was the beginning of this workshop program that we ran and went through various variations over the years. Turned into road shows and blah, blah. I mean, we've done a lot of different variations of it. And it was him doing one of the first ones was a guitar showcase in San Jose, who'd become a strong dealer for us. And I'd been approached by a gal I knew in college named Nancy Weisinger, who I think she got a journalism degree. She's a music fan. I met her through her brother, Bill, who was in one of my philosophy classes when I went to San Diego State. And we ended up making an arrangement with Nancy to work for us. We were still in Lemon Grove to do PR and produce a dealer newsletter. because we couldn't afford to buy any advertising. So we did that, and she had interviewed dealers, and we produced it in-house with, Letraset and typeset it ourselves.
Is that the sounding board?
That's the sounding board.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, we did that for a few years, and Nancy was the one that helped me launch that.
So that was the dealer, the newsletter was for dealers.
It was a dealer newsletter.
Gotcha.
We tried to have some tips in there. And here we are, this teeny little company doing a few $100,000 a year, but we were trying everything we could think of, to get the word out and make ourselves known.
Do you recall how long you actually produced the sounding board?
No, we'd have to dig through archives to see. A
couple
year or
years,
two,
probably.
a couple years probably. Yeah.
Was that could you say that that's sort of the embryonic phase of wood and steel? I know that would come later, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but the same mindset to be transparent with your dealers and let them know what's going on and keep them interested and excited about the brand.
Yeah. And then when we did wood and steel, that was consumer facing.
But we always found people were interested in the guitar building side of guitars. Mm-hmm. And we could talk about that, even with the sounding board. But sounding board wasn't really so much how we were building guitars. It was
dealer interviews, pictures of us, picture of a guitar we're making. I remember we interviewed Dan Halbrick from Arnold Morgan Music.
There you go.
And one of them we interviewed Monty Richards. Mm-hmm. He had a store in Branson, Missouri. Mm-hmm. It was just him and his wife and his little Scotty dog.
Well, in those days, there was a lot of little indie stores.
Yep.
And they were the clubhouse for people to go hang out for their guitar playing hobby, buy their gear, look at new gear, meet other people, stop on the way home from work, try out a couple guitars, buy some strings, pick up a strap. And the 8th time they come back and play that guitar, they buy it. It's like, I can't get this guitar out of my mind. And then they take it home.
And then Monty went on. He resurfaced many decades later with a business in Tennessee that buys like guitars in their last life and dismantles them and has the parts and all that. Do you remember the name of that?
MIRC.
MIRC. So Monty established that.
So the Grand Concert is a new body shape. And tell me about Koa. Did Koa guitars emerge around this time?
Well, let me just say that we ended up then having a lot of growth with the Grand Concert. The next 10 years, all the way to 94, the company grew a lot based on the acceptance and popularity of the Grand Concert. And so many artists started playing Taylors when they discovered a Grand Concert and liked it. I mean, you meet the guys in America, for example, they play Grand Concerts, people in Nashville. Fred Mullen, I think he started, who's a producer there with Grand Concert. And they really started with Richard Cotton, who had Cotton Music in Nashville. I went by and saw him, and I had some Maple Grand Concert guitars, and he bought them and liked them. He was a jazz player, and he started selling tons of them. Mm-hmm. He passed away then. His wife took over the business, and they've since they've merged or something with Great North American Guitar, a guy from Britain.
Yeah, so with the Grand Concert, what we'd had before that was a Dreadnought and a Jumbo.
Yeah.
And the Dreadnought was big and awkward, square, not real
and
pretty.
Everybody made a Dreadnought.
Yeah, and we had a Jumbo that was sort of half Guild, half Gibson. It was American Dream shapes I inherited.
Yeah.
Had you gone to the 1 3/4 inch nut at that point, or was that?
We were doing 1 11/16
and 1 7/8
and 1 7/8.
Okay, so the fingerstyle guys, the clinicians, were going.
They were the
beyond
1 7/8. Yeah.
Wow. Gotcha.
Yeah. They liked that 1 7/8, and we made lots of Grand Concerts with 1 7/8, and we made a lot with 1 11/16. But I'd sort of forgotten that we had a good 10-year run on the Grand Concert.
Oh yeah, that helped really establish us. We grew to a multi-million-dollar business. Also, what's the guy that plays with the Beach Boys? Jeff Fescott or something. He plays. He sings the high falsetto parts. Mm-hmm. Remember, he called me and ordered one with Everly Brothers inlays in it, way back when we were selling them in Grove.
What?
Jeff Fosket? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, it escapes me.
But wasn't it around then that we did the Dan Query model too? Do you remember the years?
It was in the 80s.
Yeah, so we had another dreadnought.
I bet Dave knows. Dave probably knows already.
What's that?
We did the Dan Crary guitar.
The Dan Crary, 86-ish. I was going to ask you how that relationship came to be, because you're building these flashy 80s rock and roll acoustic guitars, and along comes Dan Crary, who plays these incredible flat picker, and that's a pretty traditional world. So I'm curious how that relationship came to be.
We got invited to this party, I don't know how, and it was him and Byron Berline and Jana Jay playing fiddle, and we drove up to L.A. area.
It was Byron's house.
Was it? And went to that party, and we were very nervously approached Dan about maybe designing a guitar for him.
Yeah, we just seemed like kids, and they seemed...
We were kids.
They
were old. They were in their 30s. They were adults.
Yeah, they were like totally, mature men, successful in the music business. Yeah. And Dan had a Mossman guitar, and my first experience with Stu Mossman was standing at a cocktail party at my very first NAMM show when I was 22 years old, and listening to him sit around a group of guys, whiskey and a cigarette going, yeah, well, me and my little $2 million company, that kind of thing. And I was like, $2 million company, wow.
You could do that.
Con musical instruments at bottom. We've talked about that before. But Dan had a Mossman guitar, and he decided to come down and talk to us because he said, I've always wanted a guitar that's not so bassy. I don't want that much bass. I want a guitar with more projection that has like Canon trebles on it, not tinkly trebles. And so I said, yeah, let's try some stuff. And I figured out a way to make guitars like while we were there. Let's take this top off and put that, and I would leapfrog guitars. I go, okay, like with photographs, A or B? A. And then, you know what I mean? And you work your way through here's the photograph. And it's like, I like this guitar better. So the one that we like the worst, I'd literally route the top off, add another top, do another thing. I'd super glue the thing on, clamp it down, put the neck back on. 3 hours later, we're playing the guitar. He's like, no, I like the other one better. Okay, we do it. And then it's like, I like this better. And he's like, maple neck. Maple neck's going to be better. I've always wanted maple neck. And I go, well, let's try it. Put a maple neck on. Killed the sound. Just killed it. He's like, well, so much for that theory. And unlike Andy, who can think of what a guitar is going to sound like Beethoven writing music when he can't even hear, no, I had to do experiments. And I did it with Dan, and we bonded during that time. Mm-hmm. He's never forgotten that. I never have either. Mm-hmm. And we made that guitar that had the Canon-like projection, and I did it by making a really thin top and really tall bracing, right? And it was tight as a drum, and it worked, and he loved it, and he loves it to this day.
And a cutaway.
And it had a cutaway on it. And he had always been a guy that's like would poo-poo this idea of guitars that were easy to play. If your guitar is hard to play, practice more. He's the first one to admit it. Go do some exercises, build up some calluses. But then he experienced a guitar with a nice neck that was easy to play and was the first to admit that, oh, yeah, that's better. I've had hard guitars to play and I've had easy guitars to play, and easy's better. So he liked it, and we sold those guitars, and he went out to that flat picking bluegrass world and showed up with this oddball looking Taylor guitar, and people dug it. And what's really interesting now is, we eventually, like all things, quit making that guitar and went down other paths. And I've remained great friends with Dan for all this time. But those guitars, they show up and they're worth money. People fight for them. Mm-hmm. And when I play some now, it's like, wow, that's a good sounding guitar.
It started good and it got better with time.
They did get better with time. And I'll tell you what, guitars do get better with time. I've experienced it.
And it was for both him and Harvey that I had to design the Listug box.
That's right. The Listug box, the precursor to the Fishman blender, was the Listug box.
Yeah, because they both they had a pickup, but they both wanted a more natural sound. So I forget the relationship, but I got in touch with a guy from Audio Technica, I think it was, and they sold me microphone elements, and I figured out how to make a little mount inside the guitar. We'd attach it to the X-brace, right? Inside the sound hole.
Yep.
And then I figured out I'd go to Radio Shack and buy a little the little line matching transformer, I think it was. And I don't know how this happened, but I somehow designed a preamp. Maybe I had Bill Bartolini design it for me. I don't really know.
Oh, I think there wasn't much to it. It was hardwired.
So it was a little box. I'd buy the boxes, the little chassis. I'd have a little hole puncher. And I designed it so that you could set, I don't remember if I had a volume control on it or if it was just the blend the sound, because I'd had two outputs, right? Or I'd have a cable with a special kind of mic connector to plug into the guitar.
With a stereo jack.
Yes, stereo. And I also made it so that it could run on phantom power from the board to power the mic. I don't know how I figured out how to do that, but these little boxes, the guys became dependent on them. It's like, oh, my Listug box isn't working. And I have to stay up, go and get the parts and make them another one and get it overnighted to them. But it was both Harvey and Dan that used those. And Harvey ended up, after a while, meeting with Larry Fishman, and they designed the Fishman blender based on that idea.
I was involved in that too. It's like, Larry, why don't you make these? The first ones we had, I think we were using Lloyd Baggs pickups at the time. So we had the brass bottom and the graphite top. And our pickups, our saddles were always tall, it seemed, and sometimes those things would snap off. But we worked on that. And the first couple of microphones we ever tried were Little Crown PZMs, and we just got it in there right, and then eventually they were too expensive. They were the type of mic that I was introduced into them because people would use them on stage, like live performances, have a little piece of acrylic bent in 90 degrees. They put it in there, and then sound would reflect. That pressure zone microphone would pick up people talking and that kind of thing on stage. And so we tried that on a guitar. It was a friend of mine that did that. And I believe that my old 1978 810 that I still have, that has holes in it from Bartolini, and it's had a bunch of stuff, has a Fishman blender, and I think my pickup was Crown. And then we switched to Audio Technica, which is a little condenser mic. But those sounded good, and as a matter of fact, they sounded real good. The first systems that we had that blended the two with the little Listug box, I guess Kurt made a dozen of them or something over time.
Something like that. We have one now. I contacted Harvey maybe last year or the year before, and he sent me out one and let us have it. So I shared it with Andy. We have it now.
It's pretty cool. All built from Radio Shack by Kurt, and us just trying to help these guys get a better sound. Dan was relentless, never liking the sound of his amplified guitar. So we would try things. He would try things. We would try things, just relentless, never happy. And then he'd get happy. Then he wanted to be happier. He wanted more happiness, right? And it was great. And those people that we worked with during that time, they were friends, and we were on a similar level. It wasn't like we were working with a huge star that has demands in no time, and that we're just, please, sir, could I have some more? Kind of a, so try this one, see if you like it. No, we worked with Harvey and Chris and Dan. We worked, and they were hard to please, but they were never upset. They knew that we were trying to make something together with them that would work.
Yeah.
They would try on their own. We would try. We'd try things.
Yeah. And your effort mattered to them.
Our effort mattered to them, and their effort mattered to us. Yeah. It was very super cooperative and respectful.
Could have been Dan Shepard that introduced me to Bob, I think it was, with Audio Technica, because Dan had a lot of relationships.
Yes.
Did you ever consider commercial viability of the Listug box, or was it so out of your wheelhouse that you...
No, it was just to help those couple of guys.
Yeah.
It was way better to have Fishman do it. And we finally switched to Fishman when I convinced him that if he would go to an 1/8-inch wide saddle instead of... See, because Fishman started out making thin line pickups for Martin to have 3 30-second saddles. That was his whole business. And his pickup was 3 30-seconds wide. And Lloyd had an 1/8-inch pickup, and we were dedicated 1/8-inch pickups because we were dedicated 1/8-inch saddles. Gave us more room for compensation, better intonation.
Yep.
It just had a little more something there. And one day, Larry agreed. He said, okay, I'll make you 1/8-inch. And we switched to Fishman for some quite a long time until we started making our own stuff. We've always had good, friendly relationship with Lloyd Baggs and Larry Fishman both, and they've both built really respectful businesses in our industry.
So I don't remember when we switched to Fishman from Lloyd. Were we still in Lemon Grove?
No, I think we were in Santee then, but I do know that it happened the day when it clicked in Larry's mind. We were still down in Hawley at January NAMM. It was about the same time that Dan Shepard was around and that Harvey was playing. It was during those times.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember we had one really knockout show there? I don't remember the year because I don't remember years, but Harvey was playing and Dan Shepard was around, and he brought by this Cajon player named Joel Saunier that he was really hot on. And there was some Alabama stuff going on, and we just had a show. We were down there kind of almost by the back roll-up door, and it was just a good show.
Uh-huh.
We sold some stuff. It felt like we had a little momentum. I can't remember the year.
Well, it was 84, I think. We had Harvey play that show. Next year, we'd started working with Chris, too. We had him play. But it was around in through there, and that's after meeting Dan Shepard and Betsy that we met the guys from Alabama. I mean, a lot of stuff happened from having Harvey play and the people we met that we wouldn't have met otherwise in that show in 84 because they stopped to see Harvey play.
Yeah. So you collect these friends along the way and you look back and you're like, wow, it's really interesting to reflect that people dug what we were doing and they liked our guitars and they wanted to be friends. They wanted to play our stuff. They wanted to help move it along. They wanted to invest themselves into it. And we were able to take care of them. We were both at very similar sizes in our own career and development, where it's like, yeah, I'll make you a guitar. We'll try this.
Yeah.
And I think they didn't find that in other places. And we had the ability to, well, it'll be done next week, really? Yeah, and let's try it out and give me some feedback on it. And, we'll sell this one to you on Never, and maybe I'll get it back and we'll place another one. And so we worked with those people, and we didn't really feel like we should be doing some big artist endorsement, because in those days, I never felt our guitars were done. I mean, I still never think they're done. I think they're better than ever right now. And we have a lot to offer somebody. Here we have this thing you could play it. Tell us if you like this model or that model or that model. But in those days, I was still learning how to build guitars. And these guys were learning how to play a show with a pickup and a guitar that has a good neck. We were all learning together because the guitar industry guitars were made in factories and sold through a wholesaler like Coast Wholesale to a music store. And then somebody in Peter, Paul, and Mary would buy one and play it. Mm-hmm. And that was the whole thing. There weren't people like us that would make you a bespoke guitar, kind of like a racing team would try out an idea on the race course this weekend and then come back and try another one, 3 weekends from now. We did that for these guys and with these guys. And what they did for us was they gave us exposure. They loved our guitars and they liked us.
Yeah.
Right? And we helped them be on the road and they helped us be in stores. It was great.
Yeah.
That was the year you moved to Santee.
No, 87.
Moved in 87?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were in Santee from 87 to 92.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Maybe you thought about moving in 86.
Well, we had to start planning for it then because, we finally reached the point where we had enough orders for the number of guitars we wanted to make and could make, which was a level at which we could actually pay our bills, make a living, and with enough sales, have normal cash flow and pay ourselves every week.
Mm-hmm.
So that took 12 years to reach that point.
And our shop at the time was 1,500 square feet.
Plus a 600 square
600
foot
square feet. Mm-hmm. And across the driveway from each other. And we found a spec building in Santee. We leased a portion of it, 5,000 square feet. We thought, wow, man.
Big move.
This is huge. And I drew out the plans for that building, graph paper, every little detail, gave it to the realtor. So they built that out, and then I went inside and started running wires and dust collection and hanging lights. And
it was exciting.
It was exciting. And one day we moved into that shop, and wow, it was so beautiful, so nice. We moved with 13 people, quickly got up to 6 guitars a day.
And then we tried to go to 8 guitars a day, and it was too many.
It's too many. But we had our first $2 million year there. I don't remember the $1 million year. We had a $2 million
year was 88.
88 is what my
Then we did maybe $1.7 million or $6 million the next year.
Yeah. Were you very conscious that you'd cleared $1 million?
Oh, we were blown away.
Yeah.
That was unbelievable.
Yeah.
To actually do $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it was right in there. I forget which year. We hadn't been there that long, where our case supplier went out of business.
S&S.
S&S and back
they were
in
old line case.
Brooklyn. ESS and ESS. Yeah, they made a really good case.
There was a great case manufacturing industry in the United States from Elkhart, Indiana, making cases for all the band instruments, wood cases with velvet inside. You know, think of the Music Man, you know, musical and what band instruments were at the time. And there was a thriving industry, and New York had a lot of manufacturing. Brooklyn, New York did a lot of stuff, and there was people that made guitar cases, and S&S made cases for Guild. We used to buy Guild cases, you know, and they were nice. And our case design is very reminiscent of that, with a narrow neck, and then the picket comes out, and an arch with a spline that comes up into the neck shaft.
Right. Well, the Guild cases were S&S cases.
Yeah, but it seems to me that when we couldn't get S&S directly, we bought cases from Guild. But maybe
we did it first, yeah.
Yeah, we did.
Till we made the connection.
Yeah. Well, it just became hard to get cases, so we went up and we'd get some cases from Gybe.
We used to buy from Gybe.
They were in Los Angeles, but the whole case business was falling apart, and then the infrastructure for it fell apart. It's kind of when things were going to China, but China didn't have a good hold on it yet. And it was enough to destroy what was happening here, plus inflation and the types of jobs that people wanted. Who wants to work in a case factory in Brooklyn, New York in 1988 and 90? And boy, we struggled. Sometimes we'd get to a point where there's 100 guitars there. There's 3 weeks worth of production. We can't ship it out. Then a case would come in. It would be a case that we would reject. They were awful, but we didn't reject it because we had to sell the guitar. And people would go, the case is awful at the other end. We go, sorry, we don't know what to say.
Yeah, cases were a necessary evil. You had to have it to be able to sell a guitar. But the case companies had gotten to a point where they wanted to sell to music stores too, which put us in a tough spot, because how would we buy it and be able to mark it up and sell it with the guitar? So it was a problem. So then they'd call us, we'd sometimes be behind on bills, and I'd call the people at S&S, when are you going to ship? Oh, we're working on them. By the way, we haven't gotten the last check. So I'd overnight the check to release the shipment. And then one day it was like, no more shipment. Oh, we're sorry, we went out of business, or we're going out of business. So there we are, with guitars stacking up and no cases.
We got to 10 guitars a day. I told Kurt, when we get to 10 guitars a day, I think I could build a case factory. So I did. Man, made the molds for, pressing the plywood. Me and Larry, we carved that stuff out of wood, and then we went and had aluminum casts, and then I'd work on making the things match and building a press for it and learning about glue spreaders and heated glue and plywood, poplar veneers to make the plies and make the side benders to bend the stuff, and had to buy sewing machines and cutting stuff and learn to sew, binding onto the wood. Everything in that was brand new skills that we had no idea what to do. And I'll tell you, on the day we opened that case factory, after me, Larry and guys working on building the tools for months, 2,500 square foot shop, started making some wooden boxes, cutting them apart. So we had a carcass, and then there was hardware, riveting machines, sewing machines, glue spreading machines to glue the vinyl on. We had the vinyl, we had the plush, we had all that stuff, figured out where to get it. And the first 50 cases, me and my wife and my mother-in-law covered and lined and riveted on a weekend.
How did we get by during that period? Did we stop making guitars? Would we somehow get some cases from somebody to keep shipping guitars? I mean, how did we survive that? They would just
scraggle in. We got most of them from Geib, and then we got some from Jerry at G&G. They had a dreadnought case that we could use, and another big case we could somehow drop a jumbo in, and we just found the cases, but we still only had the 3 shapes.
We may have even gotten some from Blue Guitar. They'd help us out through the years where we couldn't get stuff and we were broke. Tuners, things like that. May have gotten some cases from them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were friends to us.
Yeah. It was rough.
Because you still had to build guitars in the meantime.
Making the guitars and trying to figure out how to make cases.
How did we meet Pete Hardy to hire him to be the manager?
Well, Pete had the shop, Rush Creek, right next to us, right beside us, between us and Norm Spellier's Top Shop when we were in Lemon Grove.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right.
Pete worked out of the old second half of the American Dream Shop. We had 2 buildings. We moved out of one of them. Eventually, Pete started his business called Rush Creek, and they made ripstop nylon things, backpacks, and that kind of stuff. And he sewed goods. And Norm had the Formica shop. And they both slowly closed their businesses. But I knew Pete knew how to sew and cut fabric and do all the kind of things that we needed to do to cover and line a case. He had those hand skills and working knowledge of buying fabric, rolling it out, stacking it up this thick, running the knife through, cutting all those things. And, he didn't know how to use the pot Devon gluers that we use with animal hide glue that we stick the stuff on with and that kind of thing. But he learned it was all. And so I hired him. He was available. And he came out and he started working. We figured it out together, and he had run a crew before of his own business. And
gosh.
He worked for us for a few years before he moved on to Central California.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you figured it out and you did the work.
Oh my gosh.
Figured it out. I would go visit case factories and I'd go, boy, these guys can really cover and line. They do a pretty good job, but the woodworking isn't very good. And so my case theory was, I think I can make a really good case. The case itself, not the covering on the case and the lining in the case, but the actual wooden box, because I knew how to do that and I knew what to do to make it right. Cases that actually fit our guitars too, instead of one size fits all, which is the same way of one size fits none. It's the same way of saying the same thing. And so we designed shapes that fit our guitars and made the molds for them. And the woodworking wasn't hard to figure out, but the covering was. But we did. And we got it going. We only had to make 10 cases a day. Now we make a couple hundred cases a day pretty easily. Thinking about it too much.
You designed a really sexy arch for the lid.
It was pretty. It still is.
And functional.
Yeah. Super strong. But it has some style to it. It's distinctive. I like it.
Did you and Larry, or who designed the little, the middle label that goes on it? That little plaque?
I think by the time we did that, Scott Meyer designed it.
Oh, did he? Oh, okay.
I think he did.
That was quite a while later. I didn't start working with Scott till maybe 93.
I don't remember designing it, and it doesn't look like something Larry would do.
Okay.
Who was the other?
Steve Sharp?
Steve Sharp. Maybe Steve Sharp
Steve Sharp and his brother, maybe?
I'll bet you Steve Sharp did it, not
yeah.
Scott. The people we've worked with along the way that had a lot of
they
fingerprints
contributed
on our guitars.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I, for one, am glad you started building cases back in 1989.
Yeah. It opened up the possibilities for our business, and it's we've made a lot of cases over the years, and it makes us pretty self-sustainable. We're recording these coming off of 2 years of COVID, 2.5 years of COVID almost, and supply chain. And it really makes a lot of sense for us to buy broken down raw material, pallets of veneer, pallets of rolls of material, boxes of stuff. When you think about shipping a case to somebody, we would buy boxes of empty cases, huge, giant, empty things, the volume that it takes up. Ship it from New York, ship it from China, ship it from wherever. But here we don't have that. We make them every day. They come across the border in our daily run, and we use them. And they're gone. And the inventory is almost nothing, And it gives us flexibility to move forward. We can't sell guitars without cases. Got to do it ourselves, which is one of our themes, vertically integrated.
Well, guys, I have one last topic for you. And I know for me, my thoughts, my memories aren't neatly categorized by decade, but I was hoping we could give it a go and you could talk about the trade show experience in the 80s. And just thinking back to what those early trade shows were like for you guys, how you got there, the fun you had, the observations you made about other manufacturers, how people responded to the guitars that you brought to the show. Just riff with me if you would indulge me.
Well, I think the first show we were at was with Rothschild when they were a distributor in would have been the 78 show, I think. And we were with them for a couple of years. We've gone through that before.
I went to that show myself. The first show we attended was Rothschild. It was in
Atlanta.
It was in Atlanta, and we couldn't afford plane tickets for anybody to go except one person, so I was elected.
Yeah. And then we did some winter markets with them.
I was 77, by the way.
And the winter market was, I think it was in the Disneyland Hotel. I think it wasn't in Anaheim Convention Center yet. And then because we were able to get out and see dealers around California and in this West Coast, we decided that we would do the Chicago show to try to meet other dealers we weren't able to easily meet or travel to. So we did that several years. We've talked about the disaster that was before, the Dean booth next to us. We talked about that earlier.
And you flew first class there, right?
I don't think so. And
we drove 52 hours straight nonstop without stopping at a hotel, pulling a U-Haul trailer with our booth.
So then we started up at the Anaheim show may have been, I don't know, I remember the 82 show, and we started doing that every year. Somewhere in there, the summer show stopped. It kind of like the bubble burst in Chicago. Then after a few years hiatus, it started out small again as a summer show, like in Nashville.
But think about that show in New Orleans that we went to. Nancy Weisinger was with us.
Oh, that was horrible.
And our catalogs would always arrive like the day before the show. We'd have boxes shipped there. I still can smell the smell of freshly printed catalogs in a hotel room, and us getting those boxes. Kurt would go to the bus station or something and pick them up and bring them in, and we'd cut them open. We're like, catalogs! Oh, catalogs! We have them. You could smell
Felt like
them.
a real company.
Oh, it was awesome. We took it down to that show. It was so hot and humid.
Hot. Oh my God.
You walk out of the door and you just get clobbered with humidity. It's like you needed gills to breathe. And we were in a separate hall from everything else. It was this extra hall, and we were in there. And then I got the flu in the middle of that show and couldn't go for a couple of days, maybe a day and a half or something. And we were selling nothing. Nothing was happening. And I missed a whole day. And the next day around 2 p.m, I managed to get out of bed. It's like, okay, I'm feeling pretty good. And I got on, we stayed way far away from the show, and we rode a bus in, and because we couldn't afford really. And so I came in, I found my way in, and I walked up to that booth, and it was empty. And there was Kurt and Nancy and
Cindy maybe. And I walked in and I go, "Dead, hon?" They're like, "No, it's been crazy. So many people came in. This is the first lull we've had all day." I'm like, "You're kidding me." It's like, "No, we sold like 48 guitars this morning." I'm like, "You sold 48 guitars?" And they're like, "Yeah, we sold 40. Look at these. We have a stack of orders. There's like 48 guitars." And it ended up being a great show. It was a great show on the last day. Yeah, it was so hot and humid. You'd walk down to the main building, and it'd be like, am I going to survive to make it down there? I mean, that's how unbearable it was.
But we had shows, summer shows in Chicago, and we loved it. You'd walk down Lakeshore Drive. There were restaurants there, and that's when we were hanging out with Chris and Harvey together. And we'd go to dinner together, and we're still learning what a nice restaurant was, if you could ever afford one, that type of thing. I remember one show, it was pouring rain. We didn't know where to eat. And we were like, "Look at this place. It looks good. Lowry's prime rib. I mean, I'd heard of Lowry's seasoned salt, didn't put it together. And we ducked in because it was pouring rain on us. So we went in there and was like, "Wow, what is this place?" So we sat down, and they came up and said, All we need to know is, do you want mashed potato or baked potato? I'm like, baked potato? And they're like, okay, we'll take care of the rest. And the next thing you know, you're eating like one of the best meals you ever had in your life. Wow, this is great. So we had a lot of great experiences. But at the show, we would meet sales reps from other companies. I loved them because I got to know other guitar makers there. And we had some respect. People came by. They'd heard of our guitars. They liked our guitars. I've developed a little saying, there's things that people like and things that people buy. They're not necessarily always the same thing. And so I've always tried to make something that people like and they buy, right? Because sometimes I'll say, we would make a oddball guitar for the show and people want their picture taken with. And so I'd expand that. When you're planning guitars for the show, remember, there's things that people want their picture taken with, and then there's things that people buy. And we should make things that people buy because we don't make money on pictures being taken usually. And so it was interesting all those times at the show for us to refine and work on what it is that we make that's still ours.
How to do a better show every time, how to sell more guitars, how to show our guitars better. It was, I don't remember what year it was, but we ended up finally moving. It was in the 90s. We finally moved off the show floor into our own room. We'd built the brand enough to where we realized we were a destination. We didn't need to go there and be on the floor to get discovered. That we could move off and create our own little environment, show our guitars the way we wanted to, have more quiet. And that was, we never turned back from that after the first year of doing it in a very small booth.
Yeah,
we had those cabinets you built with Richard. So there must have been it was the mid 90s by then. Mm-hmm. Skipping ahead a little bit because we met him around 94.
Yeah. We went from a 10x10 to a 20x20 to a 4x4 to a 3x2. So we had 6 booths, and our little soundproof room went along to all of those, and we kept decorating around it. And then finally we went to a room all on our own. We were wondering, well, are people going to come find us? Are they going to find us and see us if we're not on the show? And my feeling was people aren't going to fly across the world to come to a show and not look at their map and find out where Taylor is. They're not going to, well, I was going to see you, but I didn't see you on the shop floor. Mm-hmm. No, they sought us out. And it made a big difference because it was quieter. You could talk better. People could hear better. And all of those shows were times to meet up with people we knew. And it's kind of like a re-engagement into the industry that you're in, because you can feel a little bit isolated doing your thing or just making guitars, sending it to dealers, getting feedback. But to go there and go, wow, there's this whole big world of everybody doing everything. We compare pretty well, or we suck. I mean, it's a good assessment of where you stand, who's coming up from you. I talked a little bit earlier today about that one show in Hall E, I think, or Hall D in Anaheim. That was a good one where Harvey was playing and Dan Shepard showed up and we met Alabama. And that was the year that I met Paul Reed Smith, and he had a 10 by 20 booth in the same thing, even closer to the back door with his guitars, and young guy like me, and it's just fun to think about all the people that you've met over the years, that you've watched them develop their business and the industry grow. It's really, really fun. And they were hard and they were expensive. And we've always made our own display. We've never had a display company do it because we suffer from do-it-yourself-itis. If you can, I make things, and so we would make our booths, and that was always a great advantage, especially when we ended up in San Diego with Anaheim show being the big one. We could truck the booth that you are used to us having. We build it and we set it up. And we truck it up there and we truck it back. And that would be impossible to do that if we were taking it across the country and using a contractor to build it and a contractor to set it up.
Yeah, you're just paying them, for their ideas. We already had the ideas of what to do. And we didn't need to pay someone else a profit to do that or make it for us. And we even at one point in, I think it was the early 90s, we designed our own little soundproof room too, so you could hear our guitars. So someone could take in it was the evolution from having Harvey or Chris demo our guitars to now have a little room you could go in before we had our own room to actually be able to hear the guitars. We designed this little room and made it, and I found soundproofing, that would go in the walls, and we had a little roof and little ventilation fans and
windows to see out. You could put 4 people in it facing each other, and a couple could be playing guitars. And one of the big objections, one of the easiest ways for a dealer to wiggle out of a serious conversation about becoming a dealer is, well, boys, I really can't hear it here. I mean, it's like you could put off that conversation and you won't have to buy, because people come there to buy, but then they don't want to buy, and it's just psychology of that. We're like, oh, we got that solved. Come sit down in here. And I'd close the door to that room, and it would be from noisy to, because it was a 40 dB loss of sound when you close that door, and the cool air was flowing right by your face, and they're like, could I take a nap in here?
Stay in here.
And you're like, well, I'm going to tell you a bedtime story. And we would start at the beginning about being 19 years old and tell them the whole story. We told that story so many times in that booth, either Kurt or me, and you could hear the guitars, and they were holding a guitar playing it. That booth right there
that helped
opened a lot of dealers.
It was the right thing at the right time.
There was a huge issue. We solved it. You can't hear the guitars. We heard that more often than anything else.
Boy, I know that one. Yeah.
I don't remember what year we did that, but did we have that when we did the artist guitars?
Yeah, the first year that we did it, it went to a Chicago show, and Harvey had his third-hand capo booth beside us, and our 2 booths down, and he would do that and come over and play back and forth. And so it was after the Chicago show that we drove to, because that was the first failed
First,
booth.
we had one with just walls with no roof, and that didn't work at all.
Plus, the vacuum lady broke it, and the door was hanging by a corner.
And we trailered the thing all the way across the country, too.
What a disaster. What idiots. But the next booth was good. And our whole display, it was like Felix the cat. Our whole display was inside that. So this crate would arrive. It was for a 10 by 20 booth. It weighed 1,800 pounds, but with 3 guys with their backs to it, we scoot it into the middle by ourselves, take off the plywood that covered it, put it on the back, pull out a extension cord that I made that plugged into it, and we'd wait for power, and then pull out carpet, pull out these walls, pull out this stuff. We had the whole thing set up before the union even caught up with us. It was done.
Yeah, we should look for a picture of that. I'm sure we have some somewhere. Yeah. We were talking about a year or two ago, and I guess we got rid of it.
You know, I don't know what happened to it, Kurt, but it was in storage, and I had someone take it out of storage, and it was all painted on the outside and stripped bare on the inside. I have no idea how that happened, or I don't know, because I thought that it was going to be in some kind of good shape, and I wanted to set it up in a museum, kind of the way it was, because it was the booth that saved the world.
It would have been fun, yeah.
When you could close the door, you were out of the mayhem of the noise, and noise is very fatiguing, right? And so people would love to get in there and not get out, It's like, hey, can I come by and sit in your booth and take a rest? Be my guest. Play a guitar while you're here. It was good.
So, NAMM shows were a learning experience for us.
Mm-hmm. And they evolved over time.
Kept evolving, yeah.
Well, we had that space for a couple of years that was 3x2, so 6 booths. We had the sound thing in the middle. We had those cool Koa racks that Larry designed that had the sweeping, Gumby Larry curves, and they were beautiful. It was in that corner, I don't know what hall it was, but the piano people were around us. Do you remember? Mm-hmm. So there were piano players, and John Larrivee had something that was close to us, but it was more quiet, and we dug it. And then from there...
we're next to Happy and Artie Traum.
Yes, that's right.
And then the room we got was just right next to that. And then Larrivee took over our space, I think.
That's right. And we got inside a room, and all of a sudden it was nice.
Turning back after that.
Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, I've enjoyed NAMM shows over the years. I really enjoyed them. I always looked forward to going.
Reconnecting with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we'd go out for pizza with Harvey and Chris Proctor and a bunch of clinicians and some of the smaller dealers that had a night off. And when we'd take down our booth, we'd head home on a Sunday afternoon and stop at Jake's Burgers, which was right at the end of Catella. Fuddruckers.
It's gone now. It's been redeveloped.
Yeah.
And we kind of gloat in the success of the show and talk about it. Yeah.
At Fuddruckers.
At Fuddruckers.
Yeah.
That's great.
And it's gone. But it was like, order anything you want, guys. Anything you want. We're big spenders tonight. We're at Fuddruckers. You want a Coke and a milkshake, French fries and onion rings? Go for it.
Love it. Well, thanks, guys. It's been great going through the 80s with you. Any final thoughts you want to add, or
we can dig into the Santee years next time. There's a lot to cover there.
Okay.
I thought of it. There's a lot to cover, like learning about HR, how to manage people. We had such a ragtag crew, growing sales through that period, preparing to do our first big advertising to create the brand. All those things happened in Santee.
Buying our first Vidal, getting into CNC Vidal. Manufacturing.
Then Larry leaving.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of good stuff to cover. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that transition from being the guys doing the work to being the guys employing the team doing the work and doing the work. That's a big transition, and I'd love to dive into that next time.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah. I was on the assembly line for 17 and a half years. I had an assembly line job for the first 18 years of Taylor Guitars. Yep. It was a big deal the day I said, okay, I don't have a daily production responsibility on the line.
But you were working the line and still had responsibility over the team.
Well, I did, and plus I made all the tooling.
Yeah.
Wow. All the advancements I did. So, there's more than one day in a day. There's more than 8 hours in a day. And you better spend those hours if you're going to build a business. You're not going to build a business without doing that.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to digging into that next time.
Cool.
All right, thanks, Dave.
Guys. Yeah.
Right on. Thank you, Dave.